Hey folks, I just wanted to run through some discussion of that source worksheet that we're going to do. It's a pretty quick assignment. Honestly, you can just watch this video and pretty much fill that out. It's really not that difficult to do. Um, kind of take your time on it. There's a couple of short answers that you really need to put a little bit of thought into, but it's really not that super difficult of an assignment. A couple of things on there. A big thing that it's going to ask you to differentiate between primary and secondary sources. Super, super easy. Primary sources are produced by somebody that was there at the time. So, a good example, if somebody was writing on World War One, and if I wrote on World War One, well, I wasn't born at that time. I wasn't alive at that time, so I can't produce a primary source related to World War One. If you had someone that was in the military on either side during World War One, or even somebody that was back here in the United States that was writing on, their experiences of the home front during the war, that was alive at the time. Those would both be primary sources. So somebody that was involved in the event. It's even better if they were a witness to the event. So if you have, a soldier that was writing on World War One that was actually seeing stuff go down, that's a really, really good source. If someone is, writing from, the United States on information that they're hearing about World War One, that's still a primary source, but it's not as good because they're not really directly there to witness it. Now, if you're using them as a source on this is what the American public back home's reaction to different stuff, yeah, that's a great source. But anyway, that's primary sources there. Now, for me, if I'm writing on World War One, I'm going to be a secondary source. So primary sources are produced at the time, secondary sources are produced later by somebody that wasn't a witness to the event or wasn't even there. Um, Now, if I'm going to produce something on World War One, I'm going to gather together, hopefully, a whole bunch of primary sources. I want as many experiences as I can get a hold of, and I'm going to kind of put those together in sort of a big synthesis and produce my own interpretation of what went down. Now, something that you need to do. So that's a secondary source, alive at the time. Something that you would need to do, though, is you do need to have several different sources of primary sources to corroborate each other. Because if you've got one guy off here in the distance, that everybody else has this kind of general, this is basically what happened, this is my own personal experience, but overall, this is kind of what happened. And then you've got this other dude, Stan. Stan's over here saying that the Allies won World War One because they all had flying elephants and they would come down and smush the triple entente soldiers and stuff like that. Well, you need to discount that because that's one source saying something that nobody else at all is relating. And so you would really need to discount because seriously, I mean, you can't look at a primary source and say, oh, well, it has to be the truth because it's a primary source. No, people lie today. And so people lied at that time. People have lied throughout all of history. So you have to look at multiple primary sources. And then you take this one guy and you're like, I just don't think that there were flying elephants. Nobody else is saying this. This is something huge that you would think that everybody else is kind of saying, and we do this sort of stuff today. Ancient Aliens with the guy with the hair uh, on the History Channel, unfortunately. He does the sort of the same thing that he cherry picks these weird kind of off the wall kind of like, oh, this is, there's this sculpture carving of a guy and he looks like he has a helmet on, he must be an astronaut. Well, no, it's not. You have to look at the rest of the sources, and so that they corroborate each other. And so if you've got one guy that looks like he's got an astronaut helmet, it can probably be explained by other sources, or hey, there was just some guy that was really into sci-fi and super, super early. So you do have to corroborate these sources and stuff like that. Something else that you do need to take into account, and this is unfortunately, especially here in the South, we run into this quite a lot. There are some folks today, kind of running with the flying elephant example, that will look at that flying elephant and they would dismiss all of the rest of the overwhelming. There's thousands and thousands of other primary sources. Nobody else is talking about the flying elephant, but I'm, Ed, the terrible historian, and I'm just going to focus on the flying elephant. See, this guy over here, he's talking about the flying elephant. I think that's right. Everybody's got the flying elephant. Everybody, all this other stuff that dismisses the flying elephant, that's not it. It's just the flying elephant. Um, and so you do have those people today that dismiss the overwhelming mountains of evidence, and they just focus on this one little, tiny thing, uh, and they just sort of make up their own sort of version of history. Here in the South, like I said, we very much have this problem. There's a group called the Confederate States, or the Sons of Confederate Veterans. Sons of Confederate Veterans, unfortunately, they had the potential to be a very good, worthwhile historical organization. But unfortunately, they chose to be a bad historical association because a big thing that they do is, despite the mountains, giant mountains of evidence, the Sons of Confederate Veterans, the SCA, they go on and on and on and dig themselves deeper and deeper into a hole, claiming that the Civil War had absolutely nothing to do with slavery. They go on and on that it just had to do with states' rights. And sort of more recently, over the last several years, they've kind of dug up this tariff that actually started after the Civil War starts, which is kind of a weird thing. Unless there were psychics in the Confederacy that were like, oh, the North's going to pass a tariff in a couple of years. We got to secede now. That doesn't make any sense. So, but the Sons, they argue that the Civil War wasn't about slavery, despite mountains of evidence. Like, seriously, I'm not joking. State governments issued what were called secession resolutions, in which they said, we're seceding over slavery. The institution of slavery is the foundation of the Confederacy. That's where we're at. State governors themselves, those individuals, likewise did the same thing. Newspaper accounts talked a whole heck of a lot about the necessity to preserve the institution of slavery. Also, a lot of them went off about the racial hierarchy. It was important to keep the sort of the racial hierarchy in place, and getting rid of slavery would undo all of that, according to them. And you even got the vice president of the Confederacy itself, Alexander Stephens. Alexander Stephens makes this big speech, the cornerstone speech. It says the foundation of the Confederacy rests on the cornerstone of the cornerstone of the Confederacy rests on the institution of slavery. He words it a little bit differently than that, but he literally says that in a speech. So there's these mountains of evidence that are saying the Confederates seceded ultimately at their core to preserve the institution of slavery. And then you've got the Sons of Confederate Veterans. Well, that would make me feel bad, and that would hurt my feelings. And so, that's invalid history. That's kind of a feel-good history that you would like your version of history to look a certain way. And I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. I uncover stuff occasionally, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this would be so cool if the reason that they stopped this practice or policy would be because of this really cool, lofty idea. And unfortunately, I've run across a couple of things where it would be neat if they did it that way, if that was the rationale behind it. But it was this other thing. It was usually about money or something like that. It wasn't this lofty sense of equality or something like that I would like it to be. That would be cool, but it's not. The state gets rid of this one policy because it costs too much money to continue to do it that way, or we're having pushback from this one group over here, something like that. And that that's the way it works sometimes. It's kind of a bummer, but that's the way it works. So the Sons of Confederate Veterans is a fantastic example of invalid history, feel-good history, if you even want to go there. So pretty much most of that source worksheet, you can answer most of the questions out of the stuff that I just said. So the multiple choice stuff pretty much is covered by all that stuff that I just talked about over the last couple of minutes. There are a couple of other things though. There are several short answers in there that asks for a paragraph. Write an actual paragraph. One sentence isn't a paragraph. There's two blurbs in there, and they both address the Industrial Revolution. One of them's from 1831, one of them's from 2009. Now, here's a big thing. The dates that those are produced is very, very important. And this is another one of those multiple choice things. Contextualization. You have to place the sources that you're finding in the context of the time that they were produced. And so that one source that was produced on the Industrial Revolution in 1831, well, what kind of source is that? Is it a primary or secondary? Also, though, it's important on when it's produced. When this guy is writing on the Industrial Revolution, he's focused on these marvelous new things and these fantastic new developments that are literally improving society. And they're all fantastic and wonderful and great. Super cool. Now, the source in 2009, what kind of source is that? He's not there. He wasn't, unless he's 200 years old, he wasn't there. So do that. But, in 2009, the Industrial Revolution is happy and important. It's happy. I don't know how it's happy. But all of those developments are still super cool. But in 2009, we've started over the last 100 years, honestly. From the time of the Industrial Revolution moving forward, we started realizing that some of the things about the Industrial Revolution weren't really all 100% good. We've got labor laws now that restrict the amount of hours that you can demand somebody to work. Or if you do go over those hours, you have to pay them overtime. We have other organizations like OSHA, the Occupation for Safety and Health Administration. So if you get a body part torn off in one of these machines, then you get compensated for it. And so as of, this source in 2009, we're kind of recognizing that these are some shortcomings of the Industrial Revolution. We also have child labor laws. You can no longer employ 6, 7, and 8-year-olds to work in coal mines or pick apart shrimp down there in Mobile or something, because that was a thing. You could do that until like 1911 or so, or actually 1923. We have child labor laws now. So, from the Industrial Revolution, we started recognizing that these things were problems, and we now have these laws and a lot of, sort of social values that we recognize that these things were problems. And it doesn't make, the Industrial Revolution is all bad. No, there's some parts that are good, and there's some parts that are bad. And so we have more of a complex view of that. And so look at the time when something is produced to provide some contextualization on that. So that pretty much should get you squared away for that source worksheet. You do have to take care of that at some point through the semester. Take a look at the syllabus for the exact due date on that. But if you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks. See y'all later.